Dear students, welcome to the next session of corporate communication. And today's session, we are going to focus on the etiquettes, especially etiquettes which are related to the business. Now, what do I mean by business etiquettes? Let's look into the meaning of it. Etiquettes are a set of rules, forms, practices which are being carried out by an individual when he is in a social or a business environment. Why are they established? They are established for behavior in the society or for a professional life. Now, a particular set of behavior is accepted by an individual when he is working in an organization. Now, these etiquettes can be a set of rules which you have for yourselves where you are bound, and you have to make sure that your behavior is very, very nice with all others whomsoever you are working with, be it in your student life, be it in your corporate life, be it in your personal life. You have to make sure that your etiquettes carry you for a long, long time. And most of us as an individual are being seen, observed by many people across by our etiquettes only. Etiquettes, as I said some time back, these are rules, and in a good workplace environment, these are manners in which you've been observed. Why is etiquette required? Etiquette is required for career success. A good behavior, a good manner can take you to heights of your career. Your behavior, especially in today's business organization where there is too much of competition, your good behavior, be it with your client, be with your customer, be it with your supplier, be with any vendor, or tomorrow when you start your organization as an entrepreneur, be it with your own set of employees, your etiquettes or your mannerism would define your success. Next, it builds leadership quality in one's personality. Obviously, yes, because etiquettes, as I said sometime back, a lot of people do look at us as we are being observed, and our mannerism, our behaviors can show a lot of leadership qualities, and the personality which has a better behavior and is been considered as a good leader. Next, it refines skills needed for exceptional service. Not many people do have good etiquettes. We tend to lose out our temper. We tend to burst out because of frustration. A lot of times, stress comes into picture. But if you have a etiquette, as one of the epic talks about, uh, you being as a leader, you've been watched by all the angles, and you have to make sure that your dharma, what is that you're supposed to do, is what you're supposed to do in whatever circumstances. So when you are into the work, you have to make sure even if there is a too much of stress, you need to manage or cope up with those skills and come out as a winner rather than being bogged down. And your mannerism, your behaviors can change. Lot of epics, lot of traditional, lot of myths, lot of mythology does talk about how ethics to some extent, and how etiquettes have referred to, and if the behavior is not good, and the persons have lost the leadership roles. Next, it enlightens one's potential. Now, what do I mean by here is, obviously when we tend to observe people, we tend to observe our own leaders, we tend to observe our own behaviors, and when we are observing others behaviors, we tend to learn a, and others behaviors can definitely enlighten one's potential of being leading the life in a very nice way, and others manners have to be learned and incorporated into our own mannerism. Last, it creates an impression, obviously, because as I said in the very first slide, people do observe us, and a good impression has been brought, be it in the form of interviews. Your mannerism does talk about when you go get inside a interview room. you knock the door and you seek permission. These are all mannerism. These are all etiquettes which are required for you to have it in your kitty. And these can make a lot of good impressions with the person who's taking your interview. Now, be it in your supposedly you're working for a business organization and you are meeting the client, and how do you greet him, how do you start the conversation, how do you end the conversation, how do you maintain distance, how do you start off. So all those behaviors is been looked into by your client, and your client can give you a business based on your etiquettes. Next, types of etiquettes. We are going to look at the etiquettes which are required and which we are going to go through in today's session. There are many types of etiquettes, and here are some. The first one is social etiquettes. Second one is business etiquettes. Third one is phone etiquettes. Fourth one is email etiquettes. And we are going to look into the first one is the social etiquettes. The social etiquettes is ability to translate good manners into social savvy, and it will allow you to put your best foot forward in dealing with day-to-day social demands. Now, social etiquettes is obviously this is something to do with whenever you're being alone, or when you're being into a society, or you being into a party, or you being into any occasions where your uh, good manners, the society would definitely look into it. And these are the day-to-day activities which you are doing it. It's not that your social etiquettes would be something which you only show off. No, it is something which is a part of your behavior on an everyday basis, whenever time being needed. It is definitely for sure that the social etiquettes are part of your life. The first one is social conversation. When making an introduction, give a piece of information about the person. It can be a conversation starter. Now, what happens? So, how do you introduce yourself? How would you would want to start with someone whom you don't know? Is basically to start by giving an introduction. Now, how do I give the introduction? Supposedly, I'm introducing myself. I say, "Hey, look, I am Professor so and so, and I deal into these areas." And this piece of information about me, or if I'm introducing somebody else, uh, it gives a start for the conversation between the two people. So it is very useful. Very important part of mannerism and part of etiquette is listen. And listening does make sure that the conversations are being carried out, because a lot of times I've seen people is they are very good speakers, but when it comes to listening, they don't concentrate when the conversation is going on. They don't look at the other person who's speaking to them. They don't look at their eyes, or probably they're looking at somebody else when the person is having a conversation. So it is not a good etiquette. What social etiquettes you are supposed to have is make sure that you listen and concentrate on the conversation, and don't just wait for your turn to talk. What it means here is whenever time being, you just keep on listening, and you are part of the conversation rather than you are trying to make a point there. So listen and concentrate on the conversation when you are into a social conversation. Next is resist the urge to jump into a conversation when someone pauses in thought. uh, don't jump into a conversation. Never do that. I've also seen people who want to get into a conversation just for the heck of it. No, what is that you're supposed to do is whenever someone pauses, just make sure that if it is a conversation, a continuous conversation, probably then you can start having a conversation. Or better don't open your mind. Is try to shut your mouth if the conversation doesn't relate to what the other person is willing to speak, and what the other person is willing to listen. So social conversation is also that. Wait a second or two and then respond. As I said, first is don't jump. And if you want to really respond, the best thing is during a social conversation is wait a second or two before the other person would probably finish it, and he would listen to you, or he would be in a position to listen to you. The basic manners when you are having a social conversation is first and foremost is eye contact. Now, eye contact is something which is necessity, is the need, and that sets your behavior. As I said sometime back, be it in your client meetings, be it in your first interview, or be it in your anywhere in the workplace, or be it in your even the student life, make sure that when you are having a conversation with your own friends, with your own colleagues, with your subordinate, or be it with your superiors, make sure that the eye contacts are there. Second is have a lot of space. And we have discussed about the personal space, the social space in our first semester, where we have in detail chalked out a plan on how to keep a distance of people. That also definitely is part of your basic manners, because getting too very close to a gentleman or a lady is not good. So you need to keep a social distance while you are interacting with people. Be polite. One of the very important point is you don't have to be active in conversation. You have to only converse there. When it is a social conversation, you need not to be you need not to throw your points, or you need to make a point by showing a lot of aggression. So what is important, you have a lot of patience, you be polite, and when you are conversing, be converse with a nice politeness, and you don't show that you are angry, you don't show that you are getting into a conversation and in an uncomfortable zone. Next is ask appropriate questions as and when needed during the social conversation. Make sure that the appropriate questions have been asked, and these appropriate questions only as and when the social conversation is going on, you're supposed to ask these questions. Important basic manners is keep it short. Whenever you are conversing with people, don't get too very long, or don't get into a conversation which takes you for a long time, and the other person gets bugged on, or the other person doesn't feel comfortable. You keep it short as and when the conversation, because it's a social conversation. There might be two people, there might be five people, there might be 10 people, and everyone has its or her opinion of in the conversation. So just make sure that you keep it your conversation to as short as possible, and try to discuss that. Moving on, we have the next. This was about social etiquette. Now we move on to precisely about the business etiquettes, and these are the rules that allow us to interact in a civilized fashion in a workplace. Now, what happens in business etiquettes is etiquettes when it comes to workplace. Now, first is obviously we are bound by a lot of rules and regulation within the organization, and other than that, our behavior also does matter, because there is that thing which is important is we need to make sure that when we are interacting, we are interacting in a fashion which is more of a civilized manner, and rather than the other person should not feel that we are getting too very active, or we are getting too very hecked up with something. Next is code of behavior that is grounded in common sense and cultural norms. Different countries do. We have spoken about the different cultures, and in our corporate communication class, and we have seen that there is this culture which comes into picture, and based on that, your behavior also changes. Now we have discussed that how a particular culture influences our behavior, and it is a common sense. If I have to move out from a particular region to and I go and work in a abroad place, I have to make sure that I do inculcate the behavior which is required at that particular moment, and the cultural norms are kept into consideration while having a business conversation. Next is required because manners matter in workplace, and business etiquettes are very very important in the workplace, because people from different caste, creed, religion, different regions, different geographical places do come and work, and we really don't know them and how they are comfortable with us. And in India, to some extent it is good, but we have seen that the etiquette matters in the workplace, and uh, what does define you as a good employee and not a good employee is your behavior. So and these behaviors are definitely come from your mannerism. Now let's look into business etiquettes and in detail, and how do I introduce a business. Now if I have to introduce someone, or introduce myself first. What do I do? Introducing yourself is basically it starts with a simple conversation where I introduce about my name, my designation, the company or the organization where I'm associated with, and then I move ahead and tell them about what are my clients and what is my business profile and all those things. Now, how do I introduce others? I have to make sure that when I'm introducing others, the first important thing is I take their full names. Their full name, mean to say their first name and the last name, and their designations, and important the organization which they are associated with. And when I'm introducing others, especially the clients there, I have to make sure that I take their full names and I don't call them by their nicknames. Next is responding to instructions. And now imagine I've been introduced to someone, and how do I respond there? What would be my response to the introduction? Obviously, the first thing is shake hand and I say hi, hello, I greet them. And if any questions have been asked, if there are any conversation in terms of business starts off, or it's generally the earlier part of the discussion is more of social, and it is about knowing others. I would try to make a friendly behavior with the person or the client, and just make sure that I respond in a very nice and well-behaved manner. Now, what happens is what to do when you can't remember names. Uh, Supposedly, instance where you've been introduced to about say 5 6 people. uh, just make sure that you try to remember the names. You just cannot forget the names. And the best part is we have spoken this also in the class where either you remember the first names again based on cultures, different cultures. There are some countries where you would have to call by the second name or the last name, what we call it as, and in some countries where you can call by the first names. You do have to remember them. Okay, and the best thing is if you are onto the table, across the table, and you are having a conversation and you've been introduced to 5 6 people and you have something to write about, please do make a point there, or try to remember their names. That is the best thing, because when you have been introduced, you've been introduced with their full names. That is the first and the last name. Just make sure that you remember their names, and that's very important, because when you are leaving the meeting, when you are leaving the client's place, you have to address them with their um, names. But still, what happens is if you are introduced to 8 10 people at the same time, and it becomes difficult to remember all the names, you can address them by sir and madam. And this is possible in countries like India. But when you move away from India, you definitely cannot address everyone by sir and madam. You have to remember their first or the last names, and that's very important. Small talk helps us to put yourself at ease and make them comfortable. Now, definitely, smaller the conversation, it is better always, and make sure that you are at ease, and whomsoever you are conversing with, be it your own colleague, or be it any other organizations, clients, or be it any other organizations, a vendor or a supplier, and he has to get into a comfortable zone to have a lot of discussions. So the small talks is the best talk, and you can have a small conversation, maybe something which you can ask them and they respond to it, and kind of thing. So smaller conversation makes a lot of sense. Now, what does small talk does? Small talk does is breaks the ice and goes a long way forward, furthering our relationship. Now, what do I mean by here is the smaller the conversation, better the author says, and as and when we have the smaller conversation, it takes our relationship to the next level, and we build up a good relationship when it comes to business conversation. Next part is telephone etiquettes, and obviously we have spoken to some extent about telephone etiquettes, but let us discuss about from the business etiquettes point of view. So it has been named as telephone etiquettes, and this is something to do with the essence of dealing with people politely and efficiently over the phone, and this can be boiled down to telephone etiquettes. Now, what does telephone etiquettes do? When you are onto the mobile phones, when you are onto the land phones, and when you are interacting with the clients, or when you are interacting with someone from the other organization, just make sure that your conversation with them is quite polite, and efficient, because you cannot be the same as you are into the face-to-face conversation. You will have to be in a very nice, and your tone should reflect that you are quite polite, and it makes sense, because the other person would definitely respond based on your behavior onto the using of telephones. It is said that on an average, a person spends about 3 hours onto the phone. And when you get into a business organization, obviously you will have to converse a lot, and we will have to have a lot of discussions. So obviously, you will have to be onto the phone, and that makes, be it a sales conversation, or be it you into the human resources, or you be into any of the domains, you will have to spend a lot of time speaking to your own people, be it your subordinates, be it your supervisor, be it your colleagues. And what matters is how do you have a good mannerism over the telephone. It becomes mandatory to get through the basics of telephone etiquette. That is what we are going to do now. And the first thing is, if you are making a call, identify yourself first, and then ask to speak to person who you are trying to reach to. Now, if you're making a call, if you are the one who are making the call to a particular individual, supposedly I'm making a call to individual in a business organization, I identify first, and I tell them that, hey, look, I'm so and so from so and so organization, and am I speaking to this person? And only when the person says yes, that is where I get into a conversation. If I'm making a call, first is I introduce myself, and then I ask whether this is so and so person. The next thing, when I've reached the right person, I don't know whether uh, he's he's the one whom I would want to speak at that point of time, or it is not the time, because he might be in the middle of a discussion, he might be in a meeting, he might be in anything. So what's important is, don't jump into a deep conversation. Ask if it is a right time to talk to them, and if someone appreciates, go ahead and have a conversation. If somebody says no, 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 please call me, and make sure if somebody says that call me tomorrow at 5 p.m., call them at 5 p.m. only. Don't call them before that. Don't call them after that. So what's the basic thing? What you have to learn here is, first introduce yourself, and your introduction here over the phone has to be very, very short. It cannot be at length, because the other person, you, as I said sometime back, you might be in a conversation with somebody else. So just reach the person, tell him that you are so and so from this organization, and are you speaking to this person? Supposedly, I say, am I speaking to the? I take his name and I say, am I speaking to ABCD person? Then he replies yes, and then I jump into and say that, sir, is it the right time to speak to you, because I have something for you? And if he says yes, yes, please go ahead and have a conversation. He says no, please call him whenever he's asked you to call. The second thing is, always ask if it's all right to put them on hold. Now, supposedly, you are in a conversation now, and what happens when you're into the conversation? Um, uh, this can be a regular telephone conversation also, where you are speaking to your colleague over the phone, and somebody comes in between. Now, what happens when somebody comes in between? Can you just put the call onto the hold and start listening to the person who is right come to you on to face to face, or do I say that, do I take the permission, and after seeking the permission from the person whom I'm speaking to, I put them on to hold, and then have a face to face conversation, and I again go back. That's the right way. We always ask, is very important. Always ask if it's all right to put them on to hold, and only if they say yes, go ahead and put them on hold. Otherwise, please don't put them on to hold. Try to ask the person who's come right in front of you to wait for a minute, rather than without seeking permission. Don't do that. Okay, so that's all. Always give a brief explanation of a reason for a hold. Now, when you are putting someone on hold, just make sure that the reason is being told to the person whom you are speaking to over the phone. And the reason can be somebody's called me, or somebody's asked me, 1 minute, can I put you on to hold, because the person, the colleague of mine or my supervisor is right in front of me. I would want to have a conversation. So explain the reason why you have them on to hold. Do not interrupt someone on the telephone by gestures, speaking, or writing them notes. Now, what happens is, I've seen a lot of people, someone like two people are having a conversation on the telephone, and supposedly I want to get and have a conversation with the person who's speaking over the phone. What I'm supposed to do is, I am supposed to wait for the person to finish the conversation, or I'm not supposed to uh, show certain gestures. I'm not supposed to speak to him. I'm supposed to write notes for him and then move away from there. The best thing is, I see a person who is on the phone, wait for him to finish over the phone, and then you can have a conversation. So do not interrupt. That is not a good etiquette. Moving on, if you have to take a call in a public place, what is the best thing? If you are in a public place, try to move to a more private place. Now, I've seen a lot of people who interact over the phone in a public place. Now, when you are interacting in a public place, just move away, just maybe about 2 meters or 5 meters away from the main public point where there is huge gathering. Just move away, take the call, and tell the person that you are in a market, or you are in a shopping mall, or you are in a place where it is a public, and explain the situation possibly, and come back. If the call has to be taken urgently, if the call has not to be taken, then please leave it, because a lot of times what happens over the phone, possibly when you are in a public place, you are not able to hear the person whomsoever is called you, and you might land up in a wrong conversation, or you might listen something wrong. Please don't pick up certain times if it is not an important one. If it is an important call which you feel so that it has to be taken, in that case, move away from one place, uh, move to a place where very less number of people are there. The next thing is, hearing one-sided conversation alienates the person not in the conversation. Now, a lot of people are onto the phone, but they are not hooked onto the phone. I mean to see here is they are just listening, and it's not good. So it doesn't good. It is not a good telephone etiquette. That is what I can say. Now, as I was speaking about, if you have to take a call in a public place, just make sure that keep it short and discreet. Do not tell the other person whomsoever is called that you are in a public place, and you can call them sometime later or something like that sort. Or if you're driving, or if you're something, you're busy, just tell the person, receive the call, but tell it in a very short and sweet way that, look, I'm busy. You can call me sometime later, and if it's too very important, probably you can move away to a private place and you can stop and then talk to them. We move on to the next is email etiquette. Now, obviously, a lot of us send a lot of emails, and today's technology, what happens is business communication or general communication also is through emails, and etiquette onto email is very, very important. So, first thing is, you need to have a courtesy of greeting and closing. Now, we've learned this in while we were having a discussion on two emails. And now, anyways, what are the etiquettes? Is obviously you have to greet the person whom you are sending a mail. It can be your client, it can be your own colleague, it can be your boss, it can be your subordinate, it can be anybody in the organization. Just make sure you start with the greetings, and you're closing also with a courtesy, thanks and regards, or thanking you, and these kind of a conversation. Next is address appropriately and correctly spell the names. Address appropriately, and the use of spellings. If you are trying to address a specific person there, just make sure that you spell their names in a nice way. Also, do have a spell check while sending the mail. There's a lot of people do send the mail without spell check, and there are a lot of times the error might lose. You might lose a client because of your not checking the emails, spelling on the emails. The right tone is also important, and when you're writing, just make sure that the tone which you're using is quite friendly and pleasant enough and polite enough to make sure that the client is impressed by your tone also. Correct formatting and structure of the email is very important. You should know the basic etiquette in terms of writing emails. Is you in the body of the email you use, if you are using say about 7 to 8 sentences, can you put it across into two paragraphs, so that the paragraph number one relates to the paragraph number two, and paragraph number two is related to paragraph number one. And what happens is the formatting, possibly if the person whomsoever is going through is quite busy, he looks into your paragraph number one, and if he finds interesting, he moves on to paragraph number two. Something on that sort. Don't have an email which is quite lengthy. Have it brief and to the point. It makes more sense when you have your emails brief and to the point. If you would want the person to go through any additional information, you can always have it as an attachment rather than putting across there itself. And then always end your emails, as I said in the very first, you need to have a courtesy of closing also. And as the courtesy to close is thank you sincerely and best regards and all those things. I've seen people using fancy fonts. Please do not use fancy fonts. Fancy fonts is not accepted at a business organization communication. And business communication does make sense to have a proper font size and a proper fonts. And if you would like to highlight, please do use the underline or the bold rather than fancy fonts. Next is use of emoticons. These are emotional icons which have been used in the emails, and um, sometimes in a business communication it is best not to use the emoticons. But if you want to use it one possibly. I would not suggest you anyways. But if the intent is clear in sending the mail, then only you tend to use this. Typing your email in all small cases gives the perception of lack of education or laziness. Just make sure that like if you're starting the mail like dear sir, so D and S has to be in capital there, and just make sure that wherever the capital, supposedly I'm writing about a particular country, so the name of the country or a particular word which has to be in the capital, it has to be in the capital. So if I'm writing about India, I write it with I as a capital there. So make sure that these are basics in email. You tend to learn these things. Very important is you need to have a meaningful subject line, and this subject line can make sure that the person whomsoever is going through your mail, first impression is through your subject line, and if he doesn't find it interesting, you would not open it also. So very important is a meaningful subject line, and which has a correlation to which is there into that particular body. So the correlation should be there, and if it doesn't, then people, even if they open, they would not be interested to read your emails. So meaningful subject line is something you have to. Uh, 2CC and BCC is how do we use. Two is field for those who would like to be a response form. Now, if I am sending a mail to a particular student or a particular colleague of mine, he becomes to I need to use his email ID as in the form of two, and CC is a field for those who are just for information there. Now, supposedly I'm writing an email to um, my colleague, and I want my boss to be part of it. Then the boss has to be just for information, and he's to be part of CC. And he's just been informed about a mail being sent to a colleague of mine, and supposedly I would want to send a mail to my client, and I want my boss also to know that I have sent an email to the client. And in that case, the boss there becomes a part of CC, and the client whomsoever you're sending the mail becomes two. Use of BCC. BCC, as we know, is black carbon copy, and when mailing to a group of people whom themselves don't know personally. Now, supposedly there are about, you're sending 40-50 mails, and they don't know each other. In that case, only then you are going to use a BCC. And if they know each other, in that case, if it is your own colleagues or if it is someone from the organization, they know each other. In that case, you can use a CC rather than a BCC. BCC or supervisor lead when you send a mail outside your company for customers or for project work, something of that sort. So describe about the attachments if multiple attachments are there. First thing is, whatever attachments are there, you have to make sure that in your email conversation you need to make a mention of those. And if there are multiple attachments, just make sure what is the first attachment, second attachment. You need to describe all those multiple attachments. Always acknowledge emails you get in a timely manner. The best thing is if someone sends you a mail, especially your superior or someone colleague of yours sends a mail, just say noted, thank you, and a simple sentence can probably make a meaning because you acknowledge their emails. If you are in to list, acknowledge reply to the email. If And the best thing is reply within 12 hours. Sooner the better, shows your responsiveness. And don't abuse the reply to all. Now, I've seen people, they tend to reply to all and then they use abusive language. And please do avoid all these things. Don't leave out the message thread. Supposedly, now message thread is something which is like I've received a message from the client and I reply back to the client. The client again replies back to my reply. So that's a thread where the message is started up. And when you are in a conversation, especially a message thread, in that case, don't leave that message thread. You need to continue. You need to reply again to the message thread, and whatever conversation is going on. If there are even 5-10 email conversation which is to be there, you are part of that particular thread only. Read your email before you send it. The best thing is, when you are sending an email, just make sure that you read your emails and you read it once, even if there is any spelling mistake, even if there is something wrong which you have written, possibly you can correct it. Once the message has been sent, you cannot take it back. So make sure that read your emails before you send it. Answer all questions if needed. Avoid long sentences, and don't. I've seen some of them. They send that attached is the so and so, but when you look out for attachments in the email, the attachments are not been attached because they've forgotten to attach they've forgotten to attach something there. So do not forget to attach. Next, we move on to the video conference etiquettes, and here what we see is a video conference is it can be between two people or more than two people having a conversation or any use of video. And video conference is mostly being used in organizations, especially when you have multiple heads and when you have multiple people working in the same projects or something like that. So video conference becomes very, very important. And here we need to also have some etiquettes. Now, what are those? Let's look into it. Don't go on chatting until you contact acknowledges of some whom in a conversation. When the conversation video conference is going on, you can have a chat option. There is a chat option. Now, while having a conversation, just make sure that you do not get into a longer chat. First thing is start with a simple hi, and someone would want to acknowledge, only then you would start the conversation with them, personal chat on while having a video conference. Don't send long messages. Long messages are nothing to do here. These are chats. Chats are generally instant and they have to be told maybe in a one line or two liners, not more than that. And for a longer conversation, you always have emails. Acknowledge interruptions. Supposedly, if there is a phone call, a visitor, something technical problem, please do acknowledge the interruptions and ask permission before you start a video call. And some people would not want to be part of with the video. Just make sure that you seek permission and take a video. Make sure you have made all users aware of each other's roles before inviting them to a group. So supposedly, if you are the one who's organizing this, make sure that all users they are members of the conversation, and what is their roles in clearly defined. And when you are inviting them, you need to clearly define what is the role, whether it is a meeting or whether it's a conversation, what is to be discussed, and all those things. Again, here use of emoticons is sparingly, or it has to be less. Test your voice and video 10 minutes prior to Skype or a Zoom video call with your customers. So just when you are having a video conference, make sure that your voice and video has been tested onto whichever applications you are using. There are multiple applications. I just mentioned here Skype, but there are multiple applications, and just test your video as well as audio before the start of the video call. Then we move on to the internet etiquettes and etiquettes onto the social media. And today I've seen a lot of people using tough words onto social media. Let's understand, guys, but today one of the tool which is being used for recruitment and selection in the organization is your social media and internet etiquettes, and how well are you behaved onto a particular social media. Now, I've seen a lot of people being getting rejected after almost getting through the interview or all the stages of interviews, and the rejection is just because of their posts, their language, their tone onto social media or on internet. So just make sure that when you are onto the social media or internet, make sure that your blogs and your conversation onto the social media is quite nice, and it also carries your behaviors and mannerism there too. So social media and internet etiquette refers to something where you are over the net, and it can be probably put it across like this also. It is called as net etiquettes. So etiquettes onto internet is net etiquettes. Now, be careful of your tone when you're on to the social media or internet. What tone are you using? Because it's a written communication and it's a permanent document, and it stays there for a long time. Just to bring to your notice that one of the students used a very filthy language or a bad language and onto the social media, and it was quite visible. And I went to that person. I said, "Hey, boss, you are onto the social media, and it is not good. You are having a conversation onto social media. Please delete that particular word which you have used." And he acknowledged, and he immediately deleted that particular post where he had used a bad language. So just make sure that you're knowing what is being posted, and though it is with your own friends, though it is someone your good colleagues. There are a lot of people who observe you, and these are some conversation, these are some posts which probably can bring win a lot of hearts, and can probably put you down also. Be mindful of what you post. So shouting on social media or internet is likely like shouting to an audience of friends. Now these friends, social media is you can anybody can observe you onto the social media. What happens is this is a public posting, and anything what you post is should be act of you as an individual. So your behavior has been obviously seen there. Call rather than a post personal news. The best thing is if you want to post something which is related to a personal, just make sure that call that particular person and say, "Hey, look, happy birthday, happy anniversary," and all those things, rather than putting it onto the social media. Reply to comments, especially if they are questions. Now, there are a lot of times when you post something and there are comments. You need not to reply to all the comments. Only if the comments are in the form of questions, you can reply to those comments. Social media, further, properly identify yourself before making a friend request to strangers. Just make sure that you have identified the person whom you are making friends with, and then you accept their friend request. Uh, Accepting strangers' friend request probably can put you into trouble. There was an incident where one of my friend who was a model, and uh, she got into the FB, and she used to post a lot of photos of hers, and a lot of times she used to visit a lot of places, and wherever she visits, she used to post everything onto the social media. So what happened is the person got into the first is the person sent a friend request to the friend of mine, and the friend of mine, without identifying him or her as a friend, just accepted the friend request. And then what happens is, because you've been accepted as a friend, a lot of photos can be easily downloaded, and the photos were all photos were downloaded, and then the photos were downloaded, and a new profile was created by her own name, and then a friend request to her own friends was sent stating that, "Hey, look, I have lost my password to that particular profile, and I requested to accept this." And within a day's time or a 2 days time, every friend of her, whomsoever was there onto that earlier friends list, was accepting her new profile friend request. And what happened is, after a day, immediately vulgar comments started coming, and posting onto various forums with a filthy language, with a bad language was used. So immediately the complaint went to the police, and the over a period of time, the police also told that, "Hey, look, what is that you are supposed to do is just make sure that your friend request has to be accepted only when you know the person rather than with the strangers." Next is don't overshare yourself, and certain times we tend to share whatever we see we would want to share with others. Don't overshare. It might not give any sense because the person who's going through your wall or who's going through your post might find anything interesting. So share only when you like it or you want to comment it. Do RSVP promptly to event invitees. Now, what do I mean by RSVP? Means please respond. It's a French word, and in English it means please respond. And only when you are being invited, please to be part of it. Don't lose your coolness at any point of time on your social media, and that's very important. Uh, Try to have positive self promotion. Uh, Try to promote yourself. That is the best way. You would probably portray it in a nice way, and do positive self promotions. With this, we would end today's session. And if you have any questions, queries with respect to today's session, please do call me or WhatsApp me, and I would definitely be helpful to you to solve the problems. Thank you.